The city lights blurred as Adrian stumbled out of his black Maserati, his head heavy from the whiskey burning in his veins. The towering mansion loomed before him, its grand entrance dimly glowing in the night. He ran a hand through his tousled hair, exhaling sharply. "I need sleep," he muttered, his voice rough. As he turned toward the door, a muffled sound made him freeze. "Help, please. Someone help me." Adrian's steps halted. The voice was coming from his car. His heartbeat spiked as he turned back, frowning. Was this a prank? His fingers trembled slightly as he pressed the trunk release button. The lid popped open with a soft click, and before he could react, a figure bolted upright, gasping for air. A woman, her dark wavy hair was tangled, her eyes wide with fear. She clutched the edge of the trunk, panting. Adrian stared in shock. "Who the hell?" "Please," she cried, her voice breaking. "Don't take me back. I can't marry him. He'll ruin me." The weight of her words hit him like a cold slap. He blinked, the alcohol in his system dissipating. "You were in my trunk?" he asked, incredulous. She nodded desperately. "I had nowhere else to go. I had to hide." Adrian let out a bitter chuckle, shaking his head. "This has to be a joke. I just left the club, drove home, and now you're telling me you've been back there the whole time." "I was running for my life," she whispered. His gaze was on her. Her dress was once expensive, but now wrinkled and stained. She looked more like a runaway than a criminal. His instincts screamed at him to send her away, but something in her eyes stopped him. Adrian sighed, rubbing his temple. "All right. You're safe now. But you need to explain, no lies." She hesitated, hugging herself against the cold. "Can I at least sit inside?" I'm freezing." Adrian hesitated a bit, then gestured toward the house. "Fine. But if you try anything, I'm calling security." The woman followed him inside. She had escaped her past, but had she just walked into another kind of prison? Sienna sat on the plush leather couch, gripping the cup of warm tea Adrian had handed her. She glanced at him cautiously as he sat across from her, rubbing his temple. "All right," he said, exhaling sharply. "Start talking. Who the hell were you supposed to marry?" Sienna took a deep breath. "His name is Victor Calloway." Adrian's expression darkened. The name wasn't unfamiliar. "The billionaire hotel mogul?" he asked. She nodded. "My father made a deal with him. I was the trade." Adrian leaned back, running a hand down his face. "Jesus." Sienna closed her eyes, the memories rushing in. It had all started weeks ago, when her father, a man of rigid traditions, had summoned her into his study. "You will marry Victor in 2 weeks," he had declared. Her mother had sat beside him, with her eyes downcast. Sienna's breath had caught in her throat. "But he's twice my age," she had protested. "That is irrelevant," her father had replied coldly. "He values your purity. He will take care of you." She had turned to her mother, hoping for support, but the older woman had simply lowered her gaze. "I won't do it," Sienna had whispered. Her father's voice had turned sharp. "You will. There is no discussion." Back in the present, Sienna's hands shook as she finished recounting her story. "I had no choice. So I ran." Adrian was silent for a long moment, then he exhaled heavily. "Damn. You really got yourself into a mess." Sienna swallowed. "I know. But I'd rather be anywhere than with him." Adrian studied her for a long moment. Then, with a sigh, he asked, "So what happens next?" Sienna parted her lips, but no words came out. She had no answer. No plan. She had run blindly into the night, into the unknown, and now she was at the mercy of a stranger. Her heart racing as she looked at Adrian. "I need your help." Adrian scoffed. "I already let you into my house. What more do you want?" She set her cup down on the table. "I need you to take my virginity." Adrian choked on the sip of whiskey he had just taken. He coughed violently, staring at her like she had lost her mind. "Excuse me." Sienna's face burned with shame, but she forced herself to continue. "Victor values my purity above all else. If I'm not a virgin, he won't want me." Adrian shook his head, still coughing. Wait. Let me get this straight. You want me, a total stranger, to sleep with you just so your creepy fiancé will back off? Sienna swallowed hard. Yes. Adrian let out a bitter laugh. You must be insane. Tears rolled down her eyes. Please, Adrian. I'm begging you. Adrian sighed, running a hand through his hair. He had seen crazy things before. But this? This was something else entirely. I don't think you understand what you're asking, he said carefully. You don't know me. You don't even know if I'm a good person. And you want to give something so personal to me just to escape. Sienna clapped her hands together. I don't care. I can't go back. If Victor finds me, I'm finished. Adrian exhaled sharply. There has to be another way. She shook her head, tears slipping down her cheeks. There isn't. If I'm not pure, he won't want me. It's the only way to be free. Adrian stared at her for a long moment. The raw desperation in her eyes stirred something inside him. Finally, he leaned back, sighing. Sienna, he said quietly. I don't take advantage of women in desperate situations. She bit her lip, looking down. Then what do I do? He rubbed his jaw, thinking. First, you stay here. We'll figure out a plan. Second, we make sure that bastard never finds you. She looked up at him, hope in her eyes. You'll help me. Adrian smirked tiredly. Looks like I don't have much of a choice. But deep down, he knew this girl was about to turn his life upside down. A sharp knock echoed through the mansion, cutting through the thick silence. Sienna flinched, her breath hitching as she clutched the edge of her seat. Adrian's entire body tensed, his gaze flickering toward the front door. His instincts screamed danger. Stay here, he ordered, his voice low and firm. Sienna's fingers gripped the fabric of her dress. What if it's him, she whispered, barely audible. Adrian didn't answer. He reached for the handle, inhaled sharply, and pulled the door open. A rush of relief hit him as his housekeeper, Mama Ruth, stood there, holding a basket of fresh fruit. She gave him a sharp look. You left your car outside with the trunk wide open, she scolded, stepping inside without invitation. Were you that drunk last night? Adrian exhaled, yeah, something like that. Her sharp eyes scanned the room, landing on Sienna, who stood frozen near the couch, wrapped in one of Adrian's oversized shirts. Mama Ruth's brows lifted. Oh, she said, you finally brought home someone worth keeping. Adrian groaned. Not what you think. Mama Ruth wasn't convinced. She turned to Sienna, offering a warm smile. Good morning, child. You hungry? Sienna hesitated, then nodded. A little. Good. I'll fix breakfast, Mama Ruth declared, making her way to the kitchen. Adrian exhaled, glancing at Sienna. You okay? She nodded, though uncertainty lingered in her eyes. For now. He looked at her for minutes, then sighed. We need a plan. Adrian leaned against the counter, arms crossed. Victor won't just let this go. He'll come looking for you. Then what do we do? He considered his options. We need to make him believe you're untouchable. That you belong to someone else. Sienna stiffened. What do you mean? Adrian exhaled, his voice low. We fake a relationship. If he thinks you're with me, he might back off. Sienna's breath caught. You're serious? Dead serious. She hesitated. The idea was crazy, but was it any crazier than the life she had just escaped? Adrian met her gaze. You want to be free. This is your best shot. Sienna swallowed hard. Okay. Let's do it. Then let's make it convincing. The weight of Adrian's words settled heavily on her chest. A fake relationship. A shield against Victor. Could it really work? Adrian watched her closely, his arms folded. You're hesitating, he noted. If you have a better plan, now's the time to say it. She swallowed hard. It's not that. It's just, what if he doesn't believe us? Then we make him believe. The way he said it sent a shiver down her spine. There was something dangerously convincing about Adrian. Something that made her feel both safe and incredibly vulnerable at the same time. You really think he'll back off? She asked. Adrian exhaled. Victor is a businessman. He doesn't take risks unless there's something to lose. If he thinks you're with me, he'll weigh his options. Sienna frowned. And what do you get out of this? A flicker of amusement crossed his face. Let's just say I don't like men like Victor. She studied him for a moment, searching for ulterior motives. But all she found was a man offering her an escape, one with strings attached, no doubt, but an escape nonetheless. Okay, she said finally, her voice steady. I'll do it. Adrian nodded. Good. But if we are doing this, we do it right. The morning sun streamed through the massive windows, casting a golden glow across the spacious living room. Sienna shifted uncomfortably as Adrian leaned back in his chair. If we are going to make this believable, he began, we need to learn how to act like a couple. Sienna's cheeks heated. And how exactly do we do that? First, you need to stop looking at me like I'm about to bite you. She rolled her eyes. Well, excuse me for being cautious. I barely know you. That's the point, he said smoothly. We need to fix that. Sienna folded her arms. So what? We just sit here and, what? Ask each other questions like some first date. Something like that, Adrian replied. You need to know enough about me to be convincing when Victor asks. And I need to know about you. She exhaled, glancing down at her hands. Fine. Where do we start? Adrian resting his elbows on his knees. Let's start with the basics. Tell me something real about yourself. Something you don't tell just anyone. Sienna hesitated. The idea of opening up to Adrian felt foreign. But if they were going to pull this off, she had no choice. She took a breath. I've always wanted to travel, she admitted softly. But my father never let me. He said the world was too dangerous for a woman like me. Adrian's eyes darkened slightly. A woman like you? Sienna nodded. Someone he could control. Someone who wouldn't question the life he chose for me. Adrian nodded. All right. My turn. She lifted an eyebrow. Go on. He exhaled. I grew up in a house where love was a transaction. My father didn't believe in family, just power. Sienna's heart clenched at the quiet bitterness in his voice. That sounds lonely. Adrian shrugged. It was. But it taught me something important, never let anyone own you. Sienna swallowed hard. In that moment, she realized Adrian understood her fear better than she had thought. All right, Adrian said, breaking the silence. We keep this up, and soon, we'll be convincing enough for anyone, even Victor. Sienna managed a small smile. For the first time, she felt like she wasn't fighting this battle alone. It didn't take long for their first challenge to arrive. 2 days later, as Sienna was sipping tea in the living room, Adrian's phone buzzed. He was tensed as he glanced at the screen. What is it? Sienna asked, setting her cup down. He stood up, pocketing the phone. We have company. Her stomach tightened. Who? Adrian's gaze met hers, serious and unreadable. Victor's men. Sienna's breath hitched. She felt her chest tighten as panic threatened to take over. Already? Adrian strode toward her, his movements deliberate and controlled. This is what we prepared for. Are you ready? She hesitated for only a second before nodding. Yes. He took her hand. Then it's time to show them you're mine. Sienna and Adrian walked towards the door. There was no turning back now. If they failed this test, Victor would never stop hunting her. And failure was not an option. The knock at the door was firm, deliberate, almost a warning. Sienna's fingers tightened around Adrian's hand. She had expected Victor to come for her, but not this soon. Adrian exhaled, his grip steady and reassuring. Stay calm, he murmured. Follow my lead. He strode toward the door, his movements slow and controlled, as if he had all the time in the world. But Sienna could see the tension in his shoulders. He was ready for a fight if it came to that. With a deep breath, Adrian unlocked the door and pulled it open. 2 men stood on the other side, dressed in tailored suit. Their presence alone was enough to make Sienna's stomach twist. The taller of the two, a man with slicked back hair and a calculating gaze, was the first to speak. Mr. Cross. Adrian leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. To what do I owe the pleasure? The man looked at Sienna, and she instinctively stepped closer to Adrian. Victor Calloway is looking for something that belongs to him. Adrian's jaw tightened, but his voice remained smooth. You must be mistaken. Nothing in this house belongs to Victor. The second man, broader and more menacing, stepped forward. We have reason to believe otherwise. Adrian chuckled, but there was no humor in it. Do you, now? Because as far as I'm concerned, Sienna isn't an object to be owned. Sienna's breath caught at the way he said her name, possessive, protective. It sent a shiver down her spine. The taller man's smirk faded. Victor doesn't like being defied. Adrian's eyes darkened. And I don't like threats. A tense silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken warnings. Then, as if sensing they wouldn't get what they came for, the men exchanged a look. We'll be back, the taller one said. Victor doesn't give up so easily. Adrian didn't flinch. Neither do I. Without another word, the men turned and walked away. Adrian watched them until they disappeared into the night, then shut the door with a sharp exhale. Sienna let out the breath she hadn't realized she was holding. That was expected, Adrian interrupted. He turned to her. This isn't over, Sienna. He's testing us. Next time, he won't just send his men to talk. A chill ran through her. So what do we do? Adrian stepped closer. We make sure our story holds. No matter what happens, you're with me now. Sienna nodded. There was no turning back now. If Victor wanted a fight, he was going to get one. The house felt different after the encounter, like the walls had closed in, trapping them together in an uncertain reality. Adrian poured himself a drink. His movement was tense. Sienna sat across from him, still in shock. He's not going to stop, she whispered. Adrian took a sip of whiskey, his gaze never leaving hers. I know. Silence stretched between them, charged and heavy. Then Adrian sighed and leaned forward. We have to be convincing, Sienna. That means being seen together. Acting like a real couple. Sienna swallowed. The thought of being close to Adrian, of pretending something she wasn't sure was entirely fake anymore, made her heart race. What exactly does that mean? She asked hesitantly. Adrian smirked. It means we start playing our roles. Dinners, outings, public displays of affection. Her breath hitched. You mean? Nothing over the top, Adrian said, his voice low. But we need to sell it. The idea of being close to Adrian in such an intimate way felt both daunting and thrilling. You think he'll be watching? She asked. Adrian's expression turned serious. He's always watching. Sienna exhaled slowly, trying to steady herself. Okay. Let's do it. Adrian's eyes looked at her before he nodded. Good. Because pretending was one thing. Not falling for the illusion was another. Adrian adjusted the cuffs of his suit, as he stood near the entrance of the upscale restaurant. The evening air was crisp, and despite the calm atmosphere, his instincts were razor-sharp. Sienna stood beside him, her arm linked through his. She had dressed carefully, her dark green dress hugging her form in a way that was both elegant and understated. Relax, Adrian murmured, his voice low. You're supposed to look like you belong here. Sienna inhaled deeply, forcing herself to steady. I know. I never thought I'd be here, doing this. He smirked slightly, leading her inside. Get used to it. We have eyes on us. As they stepped into the restaurant, a murmur of conversation swirled around them. Adrian could feel the weight of curious glances. Some were ordinary patrons, but others, he was sure, were placed there by Victor's watchful eye. A maître d' escorted them to a private booth near the back. Adrian slid in first, Sienna following closely, her back stiff. The candlelight cast a soft glow between them, flickering shadows dancing along the walls. We should talk like a couple, Adrian said casually, taking a sip of his drink. Laugh a little. Maybe smile at me like I'm saying something funny. Sienna arched an eyebrow. You haven't said anything funny. Adrian chuckled. That's the spirit. She sighed, finally letting a small, nervous smile tug at her lips. It wasn't much, but it was enough for the people watching. Then, as if fate wanted to test her resolve, a figure entered the restaurant. The shift Victor Calloway, Sienna's grip on her fork tightened as she spotted him, his imposing frame cutting through the room with calculated precision. He was a man who exuded control, his dark-tailored suit, his measured strides, the slight upturn of his lips as if he already knew he had won. Adrian followed her gaze and exhaled softly. Showtime. Without hesitation, he reached across the table and took Sienna's hand in his, running his thumb over her knuckles in a slow, intimate motion. Unexpected yet grounding. She swallowed. He's watching. I know, Adrian said smoothly. Let's give him a reason to think twice. Victor's gaze was unwavering as he approached their table, his steps unhurried. Sienna's pulse hammered in her ears, but she forced herself to stay composed. She belonged here. She was Adrian's. That was the narrative they had to sell. Adrian leaned back in his seat, exuding effortless confidence. Victor, he greeted coolly, as if the man's presence was nothing more than a mild inconvenience. Victor's lips curled into a polite, but predatory smile. Adrian. What an unexpected surprise. Sienna braced herself as Victor's gaze swept over her. It was assessing, invasive, a silent challenge masked under the pretense of civility. And Sienna, he mused. I must say, you look radiant. Adrian's fingers tensed slightly around hers before he spoke. She does, doesn't she? His voice was smooth, deliberate. She's glowing these days. Happiness tends to do that. Victor's expression barely flickered. Is that so? Sienna forced herself to meet Victor's eyes. Yes. A moment of silence stretched between them, then, with a knowing smirk, Victor inclined his head. I won't intrude on your evening. But do take care, Sienna. I'd hate to see you make choices you regret. Sienna's nails bit into the palm of her hand. I don't regret anything. Victor's smirk deepened, but he said nothing as he turned and disappeared into the crowd. Adrian exhaled, squeezing her hand once before letting go. You did good. Sienna's shoulders slumped slightly. He knows I'm lying. Adrian nodded, a dark glint in his eyes. But now, he knows he has competition. A night of reckoning. The drive back to Adrian's mansion was quiet. Sienna stared out the window, her mind replaying Victor's words, his smirk, the promise hidden behind his carefully measured tone. Adrian finally broke the silence. You handled yourself well tonight. Sienna let out a bitter laugh. It didn't feel that way. You didn't break, Adrian said simply. And that's more than he expected. Sienna turned to face him, her expression solemn. What happens now? Adrian's grip tightened slightly on the steering wheel. Now? We make sure he doesn't get another chance to corner you. Sienna's throat tightened. You think he'll come after me? Adrian glanced at her. I know he will. Her stomach turned. Then what do we do? Adrian exhaled slowly, his gaze hardening with resolve. We fight back. Sienna realized something in that moment. This wasn't just about escape anymore. This was war. And Adrian was willing to do whatever it took to win. Sienna lay awake, staring at the ceiling of Adrian's guest room. Sleep was elusive, her thoughts tangled in the events of the evening. Victor's words still echoed in her mind. She turned, gripping the blanket tighter. Was she really safe here? Or had she only delayed the inevitable? A soft knock on the door pulled her from her thoughts. She hesitated, then swung her legs off the bed and walked toward it, opening it slowly. Adrian stood in the dim hallway, his arms crossed. His expression was unreadable, but there was something in his eyes, concern, maybe. You're not sleeping, he observed. Sienna exhaled. Neither are you. A corner of his lips twitched, but it wasn't quite a smile. Figured you might need a distraction. She stepped aside, letting him in. Adrian leaned against the dresser, watching her. Are you scared? Sienna hesitated. I'd be stupid if I wasn't. He nodded, as if he expected the answer. Victor isn't used to losing. He'll push back harder now. And what if I can't keep up this act? Adrian's gaze locked onto hers. Then we make it real. Her breath hitched. What? He pushed off the dresser, taking slow steps toward her. If we need to convince Victor, we don't just pretend, we become what he fears. Sienna swallowed. And what exactly is that? Adrian's voice was low, steady. A couple that won't be broken. In the morning, Sienna sat at the breakfast table, stirring her coffee absent-mindedly. Across from her, Adrian scrolled through his phone, his expression unreadable. "Any news?" she asked finally. He nodded, setting his phone down. "Victor's people were seen near the estate last night." Her grip tightened around the mug. "So, he's watching us?" Adrian exhaled. "Let him watch." She frowned. "You're not worried?" His gaze met hers, unwavering. "Worried? No. Prepared. Always." Sienna wasn't sure how he remained so composed, but she envied it. "What now?" "We move forward with the plan." She sighed. "Meaning?" Adrian smirked. "Meaning we take this relationship to the next level." Her heart stuttered. "Define next level." He leaned forward slightly. "We go out. Together. Make sure the world, and Victor, sees us." Sienna hesitated. "You really think that will work?" Adrian's voice was calm but firm. "I think it'll send a message he won't ignore." That evening, Adrian pulled the sleek black car up to the curb outside one of the city's most exclusive events, a high-profile gala attended by the elite. Cameras flashed outside, journalists waiting to capture the latest scandals and alliances. Sienna adjusted the hem of her dress. "Are you sure about this?" Adrian turned to her. "It's necessary." She inhaled deeply as he stepped out, walking around to open her door. The moment she emerged, the crowd reacted, whispers, cameras clicking, eyes shifting to them. Adrian offered his arm, and she took it, her fingers resting lightly against his sleeve. His presence was grounding, even as uncertainty gnawed at her. They walked inside together, the flashing lights behind them. Victor would see this. And he would understand the message. Sienna belonged to Adrian now. And she wasn't going anywhere. The gala was a whirlwind of glittering chandeliers, murmured conversations, and flashing cameras. Sienna kept a poised smile on her face, but inside, her nerves were a tangled mess. She could feel the weight of prying eyes on her, scrutinizing, questioning. Adrian's grip on her waist was firm, reassuring. He leaned down, his lips brushing against her ear. "Breathe, Sienna." She inhaled deeply, trying to steady herself. "I'm fine," she lied. He wasn't convinced, but he didn't press further. Instead, he guided her through the room, nodding to familiar faces, exchanging pleasantries like this was just another business event. And then she saw him. Victor. He stood near the bar, a glass of whiskey in hand, watching them with an expression too controlled to be anything but dangerous. His gaze locked onto Sienna's, and even from across the room, she could feel the silent threat. This was exactly why they were here, to show Victor she was beyond his reach. Adrian noticed him too. His hold on her waist tightened, and in one swift motion, he dipped his head and pressed a kiss against her temple. The message was clear. "She's mine." Victor's jaw clenched. He raised his glass slightly in acknowledgement before taking a slow sip, never breaking eye contact. "We should leave soon," Adrian murmured. "He's not going to make a scene here, but this won't be the last time we see him." Sienna nodded subtly. She had expected resistance. But something in Victor's gaze unsettled her. He wasn't angry. He was patient. Like a man who knew he would win in the end. The ride back to Adrian's estate was quiet. Sienna stared out the window, lost in thought. The city lights blurred past, her mind replaying Victor's cold stare over and over. "He's planning something," she murmured. Adrian didn't take his eyes off the road. "He always is. What if we are playing right into his hands? Then we outplay him." She turned to him, searching his face. "You say that like it's simple." "It's not," he admitted. "But I've dealt with men like Victor before. They thrive on control. The moment you take it away, they get desperate. That's when they make mistakes." Sienna exhaled shakily. "And what if he doesn't make a mistake?" Adrian finally looked at her. "Then we make one for him." His words sent a chill through her. This wasn't just about hiding anymore. This was about winning. The moment they stepped into the house, Adrian's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen. Without a word, he answered. "Talk." Sienna watched as his grip on the phone tightened before he finally ended the call. "What is it?" she asked, dreading the answer. Victor made his first move. What did he do? Adrian turned to her. He bought out one of my companies. Quietly. Under a different name. But it's him. Sienna's breath hitched. He's coming after you. He thinks he is. He walked to the bar, pouring himself a drink. His movements were calm, controlled. But she could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his fingers gripped the glass just a little too tightly. What do we do? She asked, stepping closer. He met her gaze. We hit back. Sienna hesitated. How? Adrian took a slow sip of his drink before setting it down. Victor plays long games. But he underestimates me. He exhaled sharply. We are going to make sure he regrets that. Sienna had known Victor wouldn't back down easily. But standing here, watching Adrian prepare for war, she realized something else. Neither would he. And she had just become part of a battle that had no rules. Adrian leaned over the dining table, spreading out a set of documents that had just arrived. Sienna stood beside him, scanning the pages filled with acquisitions, numbers, and familiar names. He's moving faster than I expected, Adrian muttered, tapping one of the documents. Victor isn't just playing defense. He's making power moves. What does that mean for us? Adrian exhaled sharply. It means we force his hand. She frowned. And how do we do that? A dark smirk played on Adrian's lips. We give him what he wants. Or at least, make him think he's getting it. Sienna folded her arms. You want to bait him? He nodded. Victor thrives on control. We let him believe he's got the upper hand. Then, when he reaches for it, we pull the rug out from under him. Adrian's smirk deepened. Exactly. Sienna hesitated, knowing how dangerous this game was becoming. But there was no turning back. Victor had drawn first blood. Now, they had to strike back. The plan was simple in theory, but treacherous in execution. Sienna was to lure Victor into believing she was second-guessing her decision, showing hesitation, as if she still felt tied to him. Adrian would stage a financial vulnerability in one of his companies, a subtle crack in his empire that Victor wouldn't be able to resist exploiting. This has to be believable, Adrian warned, as they stood outside the restaurant where Sienna was to meet Victor. If he senses a trap, this is over. Sienna nodded, adjusting the pearl bracelet on her wrist, a subtle piece of jewelry Victor had once gifted her. I can do this. Adrian looked at her. Just remember, you're not alone. Sienna's eyes softened. I know. She turned and stepped inside, scanning the room. Victor was already seated in a private booth, his posture relaxed but his gaze sharp. He watched her approach. Sienna, he drawled, standing as she reached the table. You look conflicted. She forced a hesitant smile. I needed to talk. Victor gestured to the seat across from him. Then by all means, let's talk. Sienna sat down, her pulse steadying as she prepared to walk the tightrope between deception and survival. To be continued. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to give this video a thumbs up. Drop your comments and hit the subscribe button.